Senator Brown, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We've asked viewers on Facebook what they wanted to talk about today. They are consumed with the Syrian refugee issue. Many are saying help the refugees, but Kathy Johnson says, why is the government dragging its feet on closing its borders? Gus Matthews says, why do we need to take refugees? What do you think should be the proper procedure going forward now with this refugee crisis?
I think the proper procedure is to make sure that we know we base our decisions on facts, not on fears. We will have our first briefing from intelligence and Department of Defense and State Department intelligence operatives to speak to all the members of the Senate today. We've got to make sure that refugees coming here, there have been scheduled some 10,000 of them over time, go through the proper vetting as they have been. Our authorities are careful, they interview, they talk to each one. Very different from the pictures we see in Europe of hundreds of thousands of refugees pouring over the borders that simply stay in those countries. And the United States, some have said that it's the only thing harder than a Syrian refugee getting into the United States, going through all this process, is if they'd swim across the Atlantic Ocean. So we need to make sure we do this carefully. We're also a nation of immigrants, and we over the years have accepted refugees as long as we do it safely and we do it properly. And it's up to the federal government working with local authorities in Cincinnati and around the country to do that.
And I hear what you're saying, that even our geography makes things different, but we just saw these attacks in Paris. Why not take a pause, as some are calling for? Congressman Ryan, some presidential candidates, Ohio's own governor. Why not a pause and just take time to once again look at the vetting process here?
Well, the vetting process is slow. It takes 18 months. So I watched presidential candidates play to people's fears, and people have a reason to be concerned and to be fearful in some ways. But, I've looked at all the religious organizations, the churches, the community groups that want to keep this process going, make sure that it's done carefully, make sure the vetting takes the time it needs. But it does take about 18 months to 2 years to process each one of these applicants from wherever they come from. That's the way we've done it. Our borders with Mexico have done a good job by and large. I know that it's easy for politicians playing for votes to say build the walls higher and deeper and thicker and more impenetrable, but the fact is we're a nation of immigrants. We need to do it safely. We can do it safely, but it's partnering with federal authorities who have done this well by and large with local communities to do it right.
But ISIS is a group, unlike other terrorists we've seen, that they have been telegraphing, it seems to me, more of what they're going to do. And they have said, we have already smuggled in 4,000 terrorists under the guise of a modern-day Trojan horse. So is it time to look at people that have already slipped in as refugees and take a second look?
Well, we have seen since September 11th, in the beginning days of the Bush administration, we have kept this country, the Bush authorities and the Bush administration, after the horrific events of 9/11, from his second year in office on, the Obama administration have done good jobs, by and large, of keeping us safe. That means they're always on high alert for potential terrorists that may already be U.S. citizens, or potential terrorists who are on a visa, some kind of a visitor's visa to the country. We're a country of 300 million people. We don't want to live in fear, but we do. It's up to the authorities to make sure that they are processing visa applications well before they let refugees in, before they let anybody in from Canada, from Mexico, from wherever, to make sure we keep the American public safe. And I think that the partnership between the federal government and local police authorities have done a pretty good job since September 11th, through the last years of the Bush administration, the Obama administration, at keeping this country safe.
Do you believe, as the president does, he made the comments that people who want to stop the flow of refugees are playing into ISIS, that they're condemning widows and orphans, and they're just going to inflame the Muslim world?
Well, when I hear politicians running for president say they're only going to let Christians in, that's not what our country stands for, and they are playing to fears. And when they play to Americans' fears by saying only let Christians in, they probably are inflaming people around the world who throw up their hands and say that's not what the United States of America stands for. So I've heard a whole lot of politicians in this town that work in this building behind me that play to people's fears and and try to scare people and talk about things like only Christians are allowed in the country. I'm a Lutheran. My Christian faith's really important to me, but my country also has people who are Jewish, people who are Buddhist, people who are Muslim, people who are Hindus, and people who don't practice any faith. And as long as they're decent people and are doing and have been vetted coming into the country, we welcome people like that. They make our country richer.
You've spoken to this a little bit already with our geography, with people coming into this country, but do you feel that there are enough differences here in the United States in terms of our intelligence to prevent attacks like what we saw in France?
Well, we're a country of 300 million people, and I would never predict we can't be attacked. Of course, anybody can do something that's pretty terrible. We see crazy people doing terrible things in our country in movie theaters and schoolyards, and it's terrible, and those are terrorist attacks in their own way. They're just people that look more like me than they look like a Syrian or an African or somebody from Latin America. But we always need to be vigilant. We're a wide open country. We want to be a wide open country. We're a free country. We want to stay free. And so we need to be cautious, but we don't close ourselves in a way that compromise people's freedom. And I hear some of these presidential candidates that say only Christians allowed, or put up walls that nobody can ever get in or get out. And that's not that's not what our country stands for.
Speaking of the presidential candidates, do you think these recent events have changed the presidential election, that the American people are now going to make this a commander-in-chief test? And if so, is that a good thing? We'll move away from talking about emails and where you went to college.
Well, I think Americans are pretty smart about elections. I think they'll make two big decisions, and they'll make a big decision based on two things next year. One, who should be commander-in-chief and who's equipped to do that. And frankly, I look at the stage in some of these debates on the Republican side, and I don't see anybody, frankly, that looks ready to lead as commander-in-chief. The other decision they're going to make is what's happened to the economy. And people haven't, minimum wage hasn't been increased in 8 years. It's 7 years. It's worth a third less than it was in 1980 in real buying power. So there's some things we need to do: a better manufacturing policy, putting people to work, increase in minimum wage, some breaks for middle income taxpayers, all those things. And I think the voters are going to look at who would be the best commander-in-chief and who's going to continue this economic growth we've had now every month for the last 6 years or 5 years. But how we do something about better wages in this country.
I was going to ask you about minimum wage. Where would you set the national minimum wage?
I think the minimum wage should be $15. I think it should be increased over time to get to that figure by the year 2020. I have legislation to do that. Literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Ohioans would get a raise. 40% of working Ohioans make less than $15 an hour. And that's just, as we've seen the wealthier get richer. We've seen tax cuts, just trickle-down economics of a decade ago, where the wealthy get tax breaks, that they don't grow the economy. We see no job growth that way. You build the economy from the middle out. Raising the minimum wage will create enough economic activity that people that get those $2 and $3 an hour raises, they won't be putting it in a Swiss bank account. They'll be spending it in Norwood and in Cincinnati and Batavia and Middletown, in local businesses that create economic activity and ultimately create jobs.
But some have argued that causes companies to lay off or raise the hamburger prices to $10. But even if that doesn't happen, people who are making minimum wage.
I'm not even going to let. I'm not going to let that stand. Raising the minimum wage significantly, the studies show, would raise the cost of a Big Mac 17 cents. The fact is, if we see higher wages in this country, we're going to see people able to spend that money in a way that creates jobs. And I never hear anybody say, when I hear criticism of minimum wage, that it will cause higher prices and layoffs, I never hear anybody say, well, that executive got $1 million bonus. Did that cause layoffs? Did that cause higher prices? I never hear that argument. The argument's only aimed at low-wage workers, never at the executive that gets $1 million bonus. So that's just bad economic thinking, that it's going to cause layoffs. A slightly higher minimum wage is going to cause layoffs, or higher prices isn't basis in fact.
Okay, in addition to that, or maybe in lieu of that, we're doing a project here at Local 12 trying to look at how we could lift people out of poverty. What about making some changes, increasing the earned income tax credit or a government subsidy? When you go to do your taxes, it's based on family size, and there's that government subsidy to make things more equal.
I think we should. I'm the lead sponsor in the Senate of raising the earned income tax credit and making it permanent. The earned income tax credit has been one of the best things we do to fight poverty. It's not enough. Too many people in this country are making $8, $9, $10 an hour. The average bank teller in the United States of America makes less than $13 an hour. I went to my 45th high school reunion, sat with a woman who's been a bank teller at a bank in Mansfield, Ohio, a large Wall Street bank. Been there for 30 years. She's making $15 an hour after 30 years. Wages are too low in this country. People at the top are getting richer and richer, and people in the middle are declining and falling out of the middle class. And government has an obligation to raise the minimum wage, to make sure people that earn overtime get paid overtime, and that the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit be expanded so we reward work so those people have an opportunity.
Senator, I appreciate your thoughts today, and we will share them with our viewers. Have a
Glad
nice day in Washington.
Good. Thanks so much. See you. Thanks.